Well, good afternoon, everyone. Oh, come on. We could do a little bit better than that. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2015 SPEAR Annual Summit. I'm Martin Mendelson, and we are so pleased to welcome over 1,000 of our faculty club members and our study club leaders to Scottsdale for the next 2.5 days. And on behalf of the 121 members of the SPEAR team and our board of directors and myself, welcome to Scottsdale. So my opening remarks to you this afternoon started about 6 months ago. And it was really due to the leadership of our CEO, Kaleem Manji. He didn't even know I was going to say that. Because we have company meetings every week. And Kaleem chooses on occasion for us to learn about something. And he showed a TED video to us as an organization that really struck a chord within me. And it's at the heart of my opening remarks to you this afternoon. What is most exciting to me about these opening remarks is that they are firmly rooted in science. Now, when we talk about the 4 things that we wish for you, often Frank says, why do we exist as an organization? These are the 4 things that we typically talk about. We want you to have more fun in practice. We want you to take more time off if you so choose. If you would so choose, we want you to be more efficient and make more money. And last but not least, the most important thing that comes before any of those previous 3 is growing in clinical competence and confidence to a level of your desire. So after this TED Talk video, I started thinking, and I realized there was something missing. And I'm excited to share what's missing with you this afternoon. But before I do that, let's talk about us as human beings. Now, some of you may recognize this graphic. It's a representation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs from the early 1940s. And every block of the pyramid builds upon the other. Now, I'm going to assume the first blocks in our pyramid you have. The physiologic and safety needs. Food, safety, shelter. The next block, it's what the next 2.5 days is all about. Belonging. Feeling like you belong to a group. Feeling like you belong to something that's greater than yourself. Now, what challenges people most significantly are the last 2 blocks. Esteem. Not just self-esteem, but esteem from others. And self-actualization, or achieving your goals. So, when you think about SPEAR, when you think about the world, how did successful people become successful? How did J.K. Rowling become J.K. Rowling? How did Walt Disney become Walt Disney? How did Frank Spear become Frank Spear? Empty is Manji. Greg, Gary, Steve, Kevin, Darren, Bob. I practiced that. See, what we know now is that successful people have a certain mindset. I'm going to ask you, were you handed your education? Were you handed your practice? Was the SPEAR organization handed what SPEAR is today? Was J.K. Rowling handed what became of Harry Potter? The answer is no. What's so amazing about all of you and all of the individuals that are part of the community of SPEAR is that we impact tens of millions of patients' lives every year. Tens of millions. You get them out of pain. You help them to function better. You help them to chew better. Last but not least, you give them the esteem that comes from looking better and the self-confidence from looking better. How do you even put a price on that? So, is your glass half full or is it half empty? Now, there's a secret. The secret is the glass is refillable. Now, what we know now from research is that mindset plays an extremely crucial role in everyone's success. Turns out if you look at the literature of the behavioral sciences, positive brains function better than neutral or negative brains. So, how does this play in to diagnosis and treatment planning? Well, let me share with you a study. There was a study done of medical doctors, and they were asked to view a body of medical literature or data and come to a diagnosis, and they were timed. There was no time limit, they were simply timed. So, of these three groups, the first group was the control group. They were simply asked to read the information in front of them. The second group was just simply given some medical documentation that was unrelated to read before the information pertaining to the study. And the third group was primed to be positive. And I'm going to tell you how they were primed to be positive in a second. But guess what the results were? The group that was primed to be positive came to a diagnosis 20% of the way through the material presented and twice as fast as the control group. How were they primed to be positive? With candy. Not the actual eating of candy that would alter their blood sugar and alter the results, but the promise of candy. Positive brains just simply work better, and it is all over the behavioral literature. So I'm going to use my life as a frame for everyone's life in this room. Now, we have a lot of colleagues from other countries in this room, and our educational processes are relatively similar. But let's start in high school. Yes, that's me. No, it's a different suit. You graduate high school, and you think, yay, I made it. Then you graduate college. Yay, I made it. Then you graduate dental school, and you go, yay, I made it. And then we split paths a little bit. Either you do a GPR like I did, maybe you buy your own practice, or maybe, for all the specialists in the room, you go into specialty training. But at the end of the day, all of us end up in some form of private practice or academic setting. It's my nephew who's now almost 30. And you think, yay, I made it! And you jump up and down. Now what? Well, the easy answer is you buy a practice, you buy a house, you buy a car, you get married, maybe you have some kids, then the next house and the next practice and more kids. So the question is, when we've made it, did happiness lead to success, or did success lead to happiness? Because if we look at the two top blocks in our pyramid, it is the most challenging for humans to achieve: esteem and self-actualization, or achieving our goals. Now, dental school did an absolutely wonderful job in building self-esteem for us, didn't they? Such nice people. But they really cause us to look at the world in a very negative way, don't they? Now, some of you and some of your colleagues who couldn't join us today come to a place like Spear. Now, I'm willing to bet you walked in and you thought, whoa, this is a big room. Now, there are 1,000 members of our faculty club, and there are just over 1,000 members in this room. Would you believe me if I told you that 1,000 dentists is less than 1% of the dentists in the United States, and less than 0.5% of the dentists in the entire world? This isn't a very big room, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very small room. Now, I've thought a lot about why you might come here today and to Spear in general. And I think it boils down to two primary reasons. The first, Frank and other members of the resident faculty and our visiting faculty create an atmosphere that is welcoming, where you want to learn, where you get opened to new ideas, and we take the complex topics and break them down into their more simple components so they're easier to understand and easier to implement. The second reason why you might come to SPEAR is because we present everything in an evidence-based perspective. We're not going to talk about the worm theory of tooth decay here. We're not going to talk about cocaine tooth drops, and from my own personal collection of wacko dental advertisements, we're not going to give 7-Up to babies. You trust us because we present information that's factual. This is a representation of the American Dental Association's graphic for evidence-based dentistry. It's a confluence of the dentist's expertise, the scientific evidence, and last but not least, the patient's needs and desires. Now, what is the fifth element that I believe is missing from the things that we wish for you? Evidence-based happiness. That's what I said. Evidence-based happiness. Evidence-based happiness is a confluence of the dentist's experience as an individual, the dentist's needs and desires as an individual, and the scientific evidence. And there is a lot of scientific evidence. What got my attention was a meta-analysis conducted of 200 studies of 275,000 individuals worldwide that showed that happiness, in quotes, bear with me, led to success and not the other way around. Happiness is not the belief that we do not need to change, it's the realization that we can. So let's go back to the construct of our life. Am I saying that you walk through dental school with a big smile on your face every day and that's why you were successful? No. That's not what I'm saying. Happiness is not necessarily walking around with a smile on your face. Jennifer Moss, in her work, talks about the fact that happiness is not walking around with a smile on your face. Happiness is not the absence of suffering, but our ability to rebound from it. Sean Accor calls this the happiness advantage. And there are 7 principles in his book. And what he talks about is that feelings of happiness lead to success and not the other way around. You have figured out this more than your colleagues, and I bet you didn't even know it. Because the average dentist, you've heard us say this before, spends how much on CE every year? $900 to $1,200 a year. What are they doing? They are only spending enough money, in this case, to maintain their license. Remember that, yay, I made it! That's what they did, and then they stopped. You haven't stopped. Aristotle, in his work, talked about happiness as not a smile or a feeling of glee, but human flourishing. For you, it's flourishing in the profession, flourishing as a dental professional. So let me ask you, Jennifer Moss talked about the fact that happiness isn't the absence of suffering. Why are there some people that with a large amount of suffering still manage to lead happy and productive lives, whereas others end up at the place in which life had dealt them? I want to introduce you to 3 very important people to me. The first is my friend Brian. Brian I met a number of years ago in Mexico. And Brian's a happy-go-lucky guy. He lives in Montana. I've been to visit him many times. He's been to visit here in Arizona. And I noticed 2 things immediately about Brian as I shook his hand for the very first time. He had a hearing deficit, and he had 2 hearing aids. Now, I assumed that Brian was always not given a full range of hearing, just because of the way Brian is and the way he looks at life and our discussions. Then I found out Only 3 years before, Brian woke up one day having had full hearing the night before, and in the morning, 90% of his hearing was gone. Overnight. It took his doctors 2 years to figure out what was wrong with Brian. And when they did, he got a diagnosis of MS. Not exactly something you want to hear. When I called Brian and I asked him if it would be okay if I talked about him as one of my lampposts in my life for positivity and happiness, you know what he said? He said, Martin, I'm really honored, but I'm just like everybody else. I live my life every day. I'm grateful for what I have. Next is my friend Chad. Chad I talk to every day. Sorry. Chad is an honorably discharged veteran of the United States Army. Chad suffers from PTSD terribly, and that's Pegasus the Wonder Dog. He couldn't function without Pegasus. If that wasn't bad enough, he has 2 very significant medical conditions that are going to require surgery that are life-threatening. He texted me about 3 hours before our event here today, said one of my surgeries is scheduled for February 8th. When I called Chad, he doesn't know Brian, but I swear they talk to each other. I said, Chad, can I talk about you to my colleagues? And Chad said, Martin, I'm so thankful that you want to talk about me, but I'm just like everybody else. I just live my life. I'm grateful for what I have. It was as if they coordinated. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to my mother. My parents are still with us. They're in their 80s. My mother would kill me if I told you that. Now you see where I get my nose? See? My mother is a 2-time survivor of breast cancer. That's actually not why I thought of my mom, although that's an amazing feat in itself. She's healthy today, thank goodness. My mother grew up at the end of World War II, at the end of the Holocaust. My grandparents, may they rest in peace, emigrated from Hungary. And my grandfather saved every relative that he could. And my mom had to share her bedroom with Holocaust survivors, Auschwitz survivors particularly. And the stories from their own lives, of course, and how she had to deal with her own childhood were difficult. That might cause somebody to be negative, but you know what my mother always told me? You have to count your blessings, honey. You have to be grateful for what you have. What's the common thread? It's gratitude. What's the common thread in the gratitude? It's how they see things. Isn't the absence of suffering, but happiness is the ability to reframe our life's experiences. Here's some crazy data. We are bombarded by 11 million bits of information per second, and we can only filter about 40 of them. Do you ever feel like this in your life?
The great coming up next. Still going or slowing down? Click here. Is the Fed pushing down stock prices? Click here.
Economy, but not these bold investments. Page 50.
A bold approach to value equity investing. And
The Fed does indeed continue to take their easing. Best thing to do.
is the simplest
way to allocate assets. Watch video.
Alternative investments.
Page step
Bullish or not, choose your thoughts.
Page step.
No one's ever felt that way, right? Do you ever get kept up at night because the voices keep talking to you? Hopefully they don't tell you to do anything. Here's the scarier part, ladies and gentlemen. Of those 11 million bits of information per second and the 40 that we're able to filter, did you know that we're only able to process one at a time? You heard the concept of multitasking? Do you know where that came from? Came from computer science. It's a myth for humans. So what we choose to focus on and how we choose to focus on it is incredibly important. There's a concept called neuroplasticity. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I've always been this way. I have those kind of voices in my head here and there. I'm not going to be able to change. Yes, you can. The brain is malleable and can therefore change throughout our lives. See, true success comes from positive realities, not positive delusions. Again, I'm not saying you should walk around with a smile on your face every single day, but I'm willing to bet the following has happened. You're in your practice. You've had one or maybe more than one patient in one given day say, "Thank you, doctor. You've changed my life, doctor. I'm out of pain, doctor. I'm so grateful, doctor," right? In the same day, so-and-so comes in. They're nasty to you, they're nasty to your staff, and I'm going to bet at the end of the day, the same day, who was on your mind? For most of you, it's going to be the negative Nelly. I'm going to challenge you. Why is the negative feedback more important, more powerful, and more prominent in your brain than the thank yous? They are just as factual, just as important, and should be just as present of mind for you. Do you know why you do this? It's because of evolution. In the caveman days, we had to scan for threats. Threats to our very existence. It was how we stayed alive and didn't get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or something. So, over time, if you look at the literature, Jennifer Moss has described a broadening effect, which actually can make your learning centers and your visual cortex work more effectively if you have a positive brain. So in one study, they had two groups, one primed to be positive, one primed to be negative, and they both looked at photographs. The negative group saw only the prominent image in the foreground and missed a lot of the detail in the background. The positive group saw the image in the foreground and all the detail in the background. Sound like focusing on one tooth versus the whole mouth? Or focusing on the chief complaint rather than the larger picture? Sound familiar? See, turns out dopamine and serotonin don't just make us feel better, they make the learning centers of our brain function better. So, as we close here, the question will be, how do we do this? Okay, Martin, I accept that there's a lot of literature that happiness leads to success and not the other way around, but how? Turns out it's not hard at all. First, having something to look forward to. This is the Hard Rock Hotel in Puerto Vallarta where you will find me on Halloween. For a week. Did you know just thinking about your favorite movie raises your endorphin levels on average 27%? Just thinking about your favorite movie. Pictures of loved ones. That's not decoration. It has been proven to give you a jolt of positivity, which therefore releases those endorphins, dopamine and serotonin. Your learning centers function better, your visual cortex opens, and you're being more open in your mind. Last but not least of the hows. Studies have shown that those individuals that write down things that they're grateful for actually begin to retrain their brain to not scan for threats. There's an app for that. It's called My Wonderful Days. It's on my phone. In my home, at the end of the day, we talk about the 3 things we're grateful for. Studies have shown that individuals that write down 3 things they're grateful for 1 week and then stopped at 1, 3, and 6 month intervals showed higher levels of happiness and lower levels of depression just by learning how to scan better. I have done a lot of research, thanks to Clean, based upon what I saw in that TED video. Lots of books, lots of articles. It's been a lot of fun. If you're looking for a place to start, start here. The Happiness Advantage by Sean Accor. Because the reality is, happiness is not a mood, it's a work ethic. And I'd like to leave you with a poem. It's called My Wage by J.B. Rittenhouse. It goes something like this. I bargained my life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged at evening when I counted my scanty score. For life is a just employer. He pays you just what you ask. But once you have set the wages, why, you must bear the task. I worked for a menial's hire, only to learn dismayed that any wage I asked of life, life would have willingly paid. Welcome to the 2015 Spear Annual Summit. I'm going to call to the stage Frank Spear, and I have a gift for him to increase positivity. I have a Snickers bar.